So some of you may know, I recently started my own little pizza pop-up business, and I've gotten great feedback on the pizza so far. But easily one of the most common compliments I get is on the sauce. And I always tell people there's really nothing special about the recipe itself, but there is one thing that I focus on that's far more important than everything else. And that is the brand of tomatoes. And recently, I found myself a new favorite. So these are Alta Cucina tomatoes. They're from a brand called Stanislaus, which, in case you're not familiar, is by far the most common tomato brand you'll see at pizzerias, at least in the US. They have a ton of different products, but these ones are their kind of higher end whole peeled tomatoes. So if you remember from my New York style sauce video, I found that I also really like Stanislaus 711, which is one of their crushed tomatoes. But my favorite in that video were red pack crushed tomatoes. Because at that time, I wasn't actually able to find Alta Cucinas. But now that I have tried them, they blow everything else out of the water. They do have a few problems though. The first being that they're not really easy to find outside of like food supply wholesalers. So for me, I'm lucky that my local Italian market carries them, and you might be able to find them at your local food service store, but you'll just have to check in your area. If you can't find them though, there are a few decent retail options out there. The best I've tried are these Jersey fresh tomatoes, Cento all-in-ones, and Bianco di Napoli whole peeled tomatoes. These ones are actually the crushed version because I don't have the whole peeled ones on hand, but I much prefer those over these. Of these three though, I probably would recommend the Jersey Fresh because they taste great and they're actually really affordable as well. If you don't mind buying them in bulk, I think they're about $2.50 per can on Amazon, but there are a lot of good options out there, so I'd always recommend just tasting whatever you have available to you and see what you like best. For me though, I doubt anything is ever gonna top these. The other problem with them though is that they only come in these giant number 10 cans. So what I typically do when I open a can is first blend them up because I almost always use them blended, and then divide that puree into 4 separate containers. That way each one is about the size of a typical 28-ounce can. And whatever I'm not using now or within the next couple days, I'll just throw into the freezer and it'll be ready to thaw whenever I need it. Personally, I haven't noticed any significant flavor impact from doing this. So now that we've got great tasting tomatoes, we're at least halfway to making a great pizza sauce. Probably more like 75% because I mean, you almost can't make a bad tasting sauce with these. But there are a few more things that I want to test. Because depending on what type of pizza sauce you're making, the process can be very different, and it makes a huge difference on the flavor of your sauce. For example, with the New York style sauce, I like to use a pretty lightly seasoned sauce consisting of uncooked pureed tomatoes. For other styles of pizza though, you might use a cooked sauce that's a little bit more heavily seasoned. Then you've also got things like Neapolitan style sauces, which are basically just raw hand crushed tomatoes combined with a little bit of salt. So there's a pretty wide spectrum, but you may know that for me, I'm currently trying to master the ultimate Detroit style pizza on this channel, which sort of falls somewhere in between. Some Detroit style places cook their sauce, some don't, some season it heavily, some lightly. So I want to figure out once and for all what impact cooking a tomato sauce actually has on its flavor, and more importantly, what method is going to lead to the best tasting sauce. So what I did was make 3 sauces. One heavily cooked sauce, which I simmered for 60 minutes, one lightly cooked sauce, which I simmered for 15 minutes, and one uncooked sauce, which I simmered for no minutes. I didn't simmer it at all. But in order to cook these sauces properly, I needed to use high quality cookware. So of course here I'm using my favorite cookware from this video's sponsor, Made In. Made In designs professional quality products for the home cook, and I talk about them quite a bit on this channel because it's honestly some of the best cookware I've used. So here I'm using their stainless steel because of course with acidic sauces you don't want to use a pan with seasoning like cast iron or carbon steel, but this stainless steel is perfect for it. These pans are crafted in Italy using premium materials, but my favorite thing about them is that they use a 5-ply construction. Because while stainless steel itself has great heat retention, other materials like aluminum allow for better heat distribution and quicker responses to changes in heat. And that's why if you've ever simmered a sauce in aluminum or even a low quality stainless steel pot, you've probably noticed that it doesn't cook super evenly. You step away for 2 minutes and all of a sudden you're scraping off burnt bits from the bottom of the pan. Meanwhile, the rest of the sauce is barely cooked at all. Made In's pans cook super evenly though, which is not only important for these sauces, but for pretty much anything else you'd cook. Rice is another one that can be pretty finicky, but with these Made In pans, they cook perfectly every single time. And they're also super ergonomic and well balanced, which makes for easy flipping of ingredients. And the rolled rim allows you to pour things out of them without spilling, which avoids a lot of frustration. So you can check out Made In's stainless steel collection along with their other cookware using the link in my description below. Thanks again to Made In for sponsoring this video, and thank you for your support. Now, let's try these sauces. Alright, so I got my 3 sauces here, my heavy cook, light cook, and no cook. I had them all in the fridge overnight, and then I kind of let them come up to room temperature this morning just to even out the playing field here. Obviously, consistency wise, you can tell a pretty big difference. The heavy cook sauce reduced by almost exactly 50%. The light cook reduced by about 20%, and obviously the no cook didn't reduce at all. But I'm really curious to see how they taste. Start with the no cook just because that's what I'm used to. Tastes like raw canned tomatoes. Really good tasting using those alta cucinas, but again, exactly what I'd expect. Now the light cook, actually pretty different, even just with a 15-minute cook. Surprisingly, it didn't really change the flavor profile all that much. It just kind of tastes more concentrated. It's still got that really nice acidity, and that cooking helped to kind of bring out the sweetness as well. So the one I'm really curious to try though is this 60-minute cook. Obviously, it's noticeably different. You definitely lose out on some of that acidity that the lesser cooked tomatoes have. And overall, I would just say the sweetness kind of starts to dominate a little bit more over the acidity. Overall though, tasting these both side by side next to the uncooked sauce, I'm surprised how much better these both are. This one almost tastes kind of watery by comparison. So I think concentrating the flavors down really does make a difference. And honestly, the more I'm tasting these, the more I'm kind of realizing that sure, the flavor does change a little bit when you cook it, but I think most of that effect is due to the actual concentration of the sauce. So I'm starting to think that if you want a more flavorful sauce in general, it might be a good idea to cook the tomatoes. But as always, we won't know for sure until we try it on a pizza. So I've got my pizza here. Again, I've got my heavy cook sauce, my light cook, my no cook, and I've got one more competitor here, which we'll get into in a second. Let's start with the no cook this time. Yeah, it's got that super nice fresh tomato taste that you'd expect. And this is actually my first time making a Detroit style pizza using alta cucina tomatoes, and it definitely makes a big difference. But now let's try the light cook version. Let me try the heavy cook as well. Very interesting. So the no cook version, as you would kind of expect, definitely had the most fresh tomato flavor to it, but I actually think it was my least favorite out of these three. Although a lot of that might come down to my personal taste. Flavor of this one reminded me a lot more of like a New York style pizza or even Neapolitan style, but that fresh tomato taste just isn't really something that you get in a Detroit style pizza. Instead, I think probably the light cook sauce is closest to what you'd expect in a Detroit style pizza, but better yet, I think probably something in between these two would be what I'm looking for. Basically what I'm finding the more that I taste these is I don't think the flavor profile actually changes super significantly the longer you cook it. I mean, there is a little bit of change. Like I said, it goes from that kind of fresh tomato taste, more of like a cooked pasta saucy taste, but it's not super significant. The main thing that I'm noticing is just that the flavors are a lot more intense with this longer cooked sauce, which is actually pretty surprising to me because with other tomatoes that I've tested, I found that the longer I cook them, kind of the sweeter and less bright tasting they get. But I think these alta cucinas are a little bit different because number one, they're super high quality, good tasting tomatoes to begin with, but they're also really liquidy. So like I said before, since there is so much liquid that needs to be evaporated off, the tomatoes themselves don't really caramelize or become that much sweeter as they're cooking, at least within like the first hour or so of cooking. So I think for me personally, I actually do prefer the flavor of this longer cooked sauce quite a bit more. But again, the amount of time you need to cook is going to depend on what brand of tomatoes you're using. Cooking it for this long is a little bit of a hassle as well though, so that's where this last slice comes in. This is sort of my attempt to replicate this flavor, but with a lot less effort. So what I did was just took my no cook sauce and combine it half and half with a bit of tomato paste. So anyways, let's give this one a try. Okay, so it's not bad, but the flavor kind of reminds me of just like your average pizzeria sauce. I definitely could have used a little bit less tomato paste. You can see this one's quite a bit thicker than all the others. But even so, I just think that you're kind of ruining the good tomatoes that we're starting with by adding in a tomato paste. Because, I mean, a tomato paste is just never really going to taste quite as good as a fresh canned tomato. It's definitely not equivalent to just like a super concentrated version of these alta cucinas. And for me, I'm not really trying to save time with this recipe. I'm trying to make the best tasting version. So I think we can go ahead and rule this one out. But anyways, now with this cooking issue figured out, there's only one more thing I need to do in order to create my ultimate Detroit style pizza sauce recipe. here we go. Now, I've actually got two tests going on here. The first one is a continuation of my last test with the tomato paste and the different cooking methods. Because I want to see if there's a way to get the tomato paste to work, just for anyone who doesn't want to put the extra time or effort into cooking the sauce. So with this one, I did 80% tomatoes, again, uncooked, along with 20% tomato paste. And when I was putting it on the pizza, I could definitely tell it had a much better texture, a lot more similar to my 60-minute cooked sauce. So that's the one that I'm comparing it with. I would actually say that's a pretty decent result here. I mean, tasting them side by side, I definitely prefer the longer simmered sauce. Again, just considering that it's higher quality tomatoes. But this honestly tastes pretty similar. I was kind of surprised that you were able to replicate that cooked flavor, considering that this is 80% uncooked. Everything from the taste to the texture from the look is honestly pretty similar. So if you're looking to save some time, this is a pretty decent option. But if you want the absolute best result, I would still just recommend using really high quality tomatoes and then cooking them down yourself. But now, let's get into the test that I've been waiting for. Because again, I'm trying to make the ultimate Detroit-style pizza here. So with these two, I added some extra spices to give it that Detroit-style flavor. So in my last video, I made a spice blend for this sauce based on the original Buddy's Detroit-style pizza. And I think I was pretty happy with the ratios of all the different ingredients that I used. What I wasn't quite sure about was how much of that spice blend I should use. So here, I used a more lightly spiced sauce, about half of what I used in that previous video. And here, I used a more heavily spiced sauce, which was the exact amount that I used in that last video. Of course, this time I actually cooked the sauce down. So by the time it's concentrated, this one's pretty much equivalent to what I used in that last video. And this one's equivalent to about double what I used in that last video. But the other thing I did with these was I actually cooked them in a wider pan. I used my made-in saute pan, which is equivalent to about a 12-inch frying pan, as opposed to this 2-quart saucepan that I used before. And what I found was that the sauce reduced about 3 times faster in the wider pan than it did in the shallower one. So I only had to cook these down for about 20 minutes to achieve the same reduction that I did with 60 minutes in the previous test. Anyways, with all that out of the way, let's just give these a try. Yeah, I mean, the spices really just bring it all together. Especially now using that cooked sauce. I think I'm getting really, really close to that ultimate Detroit-style pizza. But let's try the heavy spice. So honestly, it's not as big of a difference as I thought it'd be. Overall though, I think I prefer the lightly spiced sauce. I really don't think you need to go too overboard with the spices to give it that signature flavor. You know, as soon as I bit into this lightly spiced sauce, like I said, it just tasted like a Detroit style pizza, which is exactly what I'm looking for. So I'll leave this recipe linked below. And if you want to check out my previous Buddy's style pizza recipe, you can watch that right here. Either way, thanks a lot for watching, and I'll talk to you in the next one.